Hello everyone, this is your old history professor once again, and today we are dealing with History 231, Ancient Mediterranean World, and we're up to lecture number 20, which is Diocletian, Constantine, and the Rise of Christianity. It's a very exciting time in the history of the Roman Empire and of the world, so let's go ahead and get started here. Now, between about 234 and 284 AD, the Roman Empire was, how do I put this nicely, in big trouble. This is a period of tremendous upheaval, tremendous conflict, strife, and problems for the empire. This is a period where things very nearly fell completely apart. It was quite a shock. So you think about this. You have basically a 50-year period here where the empire is tearing itself apart in civil wars, conflicts, outside invasions, lots and lots of things were going very, very wrong. And this has a massive impact on what follows later. So I want you to remember this time, and think very carefully about this time, and think about any time in history, unfortunately including our own, when things are in turmoil. And one of the things that happens when things are in turmoil is it leads to people starting to think in new ways, thinking outside the box, thinking about new ways to solve their problems. When everything's going great, you have very little incentive to make big changes because, well, everything's going great, right? And when everything is perceived as going great, that's also true. So even if things are in trouble, even if there are problems, you may not notice them if you can paint over them well enough. And so the Roman Empire for this 50-year period very nearly collapsed. It very nearly fell apart. It was, again, near constant civil war, outside invasions, and things like that. So let's review what happens during this difficult time here. First of all, who's the emperor? Well, it all depends. Armies would declare their general the new emperor. The general might say, I don't want the job. The army might kill him. So that would be a problem. The army might say, well, I guess I'll do what my army says. I'll try to be the emperor. But then he'd go fight some other guy with his army who also wanted to be the emperor. So you've basically got civil war, and that's never good for anyone. Civil wars are nasty, messy businesses that should try to be avoided here, and that's a real problem. And at the same time, there are two outside threats. Very big threats, in fact. German tribes from up in Europe are starting to really move around and press against that long, long northern border of the Roman Empire. This is a really serious problem. It's a very long border to defend. You have to keep armies up there all the time, and if those armies are busy fighting each other, those German tribes are going to take advantage, and it starts to happen. The German tribes start to press harder. Now, it's very possible the German tribes themselves are being pressed harder by people further inland. This is always the case. Remember what I said about my old professor's crackpot theory about the trapdoor in Asia. And while there is no trapdoor in Asia, there are movements of people deeper in Asia, and those would ripple out all the way into the Roman world, into the Mediterranean world. We see this also, by the way, in China. So that's something that is going on here as well. So all these groups are beginning to press against the border, all right? And the other problem are the Sasanian Persians. All right, the Sasanian Persian Empire in what is today Iran was an extremely nationalistic state. They felt they were the best, and the Romans weren't as good as they were, and they wanted to get a hold of a chunk of the Eastern Roman Empire. The idea would be getting access to the Mediterranean Sea, which would make them lots of money through trade and things like this. And this is something the Sasanians were constantly trying to achieve throughout their history, was pushing the Romans and later the Byzantines out of the way to get access to those trade routes. So the Sasanians are really a problem at the same time as well, because the Sasanians have been developing this extremely nationalistic view of their main religion, which is Zoroastrianism, which we've talked about. And so suddenly Zoroastrianism started getting to be intolerant. This Zoroastrianism is starting to say, we're right, you're wrong, and there's no in between, this kind of thing, and it's starting to really make the Sasanians dangerous. And the Sasanians are formidable. They're well organized, they have a powerful army, they're incredibly good at cavalry warfare, and in very many cases, they're very, very able to defeat the Roman armies. So this is a serious problem here. So we see this happening. Now, up in Europe, the Goths began to penetrate deeper and deeper into the Roman Empire, into the Roman world. Now, of course, today we think of Goths with people who have interesting hair and that sort of thing. In those days, the Goths were a barbarian tribe who were quite formidable. You didn't want to mess with the Goths, and the Goths are starting to press hard against the empire. How hard? They're even reaching Italy. They reach Milan at one point. Germanic tribes, other German tribes, reach the Mediterranean. They're penetrating into the Roman Empire. They're penetrating the Roman defenses, and this is not good for Rome. This is a very bad situation for Rome here. In Gaul itself, one guy, his name is Posthumus, attempted to break off a chunk of the empire for himself, create his own state. And this is something that happens in times of great turmoil. Sometimes pieces of your state will say, we're out of here, and they'll break away. And that's always bad for the larger state as well. Further to the east, there is the city of Palmyra, and I mentioned Palmyra for a number of reasons. Number one, it's a very formidable state in what is today Syria. Palmyra becomes very, very powerful. It is located on some very, very extensive trade routes, and so it gets really, really rich at this time, and it takes advantage of the Roman weakness here. There's a lady named Zenobia. Now, Zenobia was one of these incredibly formidable ladies in history. She was quite something, and she built Palmyra up into a major power, and for a time, Palmyra even took control of areas around there. Syria, parts of Egypt, even into Mesopotamia. So Palmyra is a formidable opponent for the Romans. Now eventually, Zenobia was defeated, and the Palmyrines were defeated. If you ever have a chance, by the way, to visit Palmyra, it was, at least when I was there, a magnificent and amazing place. It's unfortunately taken some damage because crazy people have tried to blow parts of it up, which is very, very bad. You should never do that with great antiquities and great ruins. But anyway, Palmyra is an amazing place, and it's located in Syria, and it's quite a spectacular sort of place, as we can see. All right, and so this is a very interesting thing. The Romans eventually defeat her. A fellow named Aurelian, the Roman Emperor Aurelian, is able to defeat the Palmyrines. He takes Zenobia back to Rome in chains. And there's a wonderful story about this. People were saying, oh my gosh, how come you had so much trouble by being pushed around by a mere woman? Remember, the Romans were terribly sexist. And of course, Aurelian's response was, you have no idea just how tough this woman is. Do not underestimate her. All right? Do not underestimate her. Other problems that are happening at this time, one emperor of Rome during this terribly confused period, a fellow named Valerian, was even captured by the Sasanians. He was captured by Shapur II of the Sasanian Persian Empire. He's humbled this guy. And this is what happens to poor Valerian. He's used as a footstool, so he's made to sit on his hands and knees, and the king of the Sasanians is able to prop his feet up on this guy. So this is a bad, bad time for Rome. They're really having terrible, terrible problems. Now, what is the effect of this? Now, what is the outcome of all of it? This is an interesting question. The outcomes are difficult to assess, but there's certain things we can tell. Number one, the currency was debased. Now, here's what happens with debasing a currency. You take the currency and you make more of it. Say you have silver currency. You make more of it by throwing some lead into the mix and hoping nobody will notice. Well, everyone always notices this. And this is one of the risks that you run in financial crises. And we're in the middle of a financial crisis right now. Our government is turning out tons and tons of money. Now, they don't do it with coins. They do it with computers, but the same principle applies. You need, I don't know, a few $1 trillion to rescue the economy from the coronavirus pandemic. Well, that's a really noble thing, and we got to do it. There's no real choice, right? So what you do is you just pretend there's more money, and you give that money out. And in the short term, this is essential. We have to do this today, all right? Because we're in a really serious crisis. In the long term, however, the economic effects can be serious with this. It can devalue the currency, and suddenly the currency isn't worth as much anymore. That can lead to inflation. It can lead to all sorts of problems. Now, in an emergency, you got to do what you got to do. So I'm not going to say we're doing the wrong thing in this case. In fact, I think we're probably doing the right thing. But it's an important point to keep in mind. The Romans had to devalue their currency because their economy is in trouble. Their economy's in trouble. And we even find hordes of old coins. Because here's the thing. You say, okay, this new penny is made of tin. Or let's say it's made of zinc. I think new pennies these days tend to be made of zinc. This is an old penny. It's made of copper. Which is more valuable, zinc or copper? Well, if you've got a cold, one of the things you can do is take zinc supplements. Do not eat pennies, by the way. That's a very bad idea. But you can take zinc supplements, and they're supposed to help you. But if you want to buy stuff, copper is more valuable than zinc. So old pennies, theoretically, will be more valuable than new pennies. All right? And this, of course, is what we start to see with the Roman world. You devalue them by taking the silver, you add some lead, and there you go. Now, it's a very good idea, by the way, not to eat silver or lead. They're not good for you, but this is one of those things. So zinc, if you get a cold, go to the drugstore and pick up some nice zinc tablets and see if that might help you with your cold, or but don't eat pennies, okay? That's a very bad idea. I want to go on record here as your professor to say don't eat pennies, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. But anyway, so here's what we see. We see the coins are devalued, all right? The value of the coins actually goes down. We see that the sizes of villas, country estates held by rich Romans, go up. That's really interesting, because that tells us that some people are taking advantage of the crisis to add to their wealth. Right, to add to their wealth. And that is something that you see. What you do is you engage in land speculation. You engage in land speculation. While land is cheap and people are desperate, you buy up their farm, you buy up their land, and that sort of thing. So this is a bad time. These are tough times, very tough times in the Roman world. But it's also true something else, and we've got to keep this in mind as we face our own crisis today, all right? The crucial thing is, does the administrative system that makes things work hold up? All right. Does, for example, the government continue to function? Maybe not well, but is it continuing to function? As long as that's the case, the system can survive. It is stressed, no question about it, but it can survive. And today we're under a great deal of stress, and as long as our government continues to function, even if not so well, it does continue to function, and things continue to be managed, we can get through this, just as the Romans had to get through their tough time. But their times were very, very hard. Again, 50 years of near constant fighting and that sort of thing here. So there is still a sense that the Mediterranean world is a Roman world. Still a perception that people have that this is the Roman Empire and we are part of the Roman Empire. And this psychological perception is a big part of how they survived. It's a big part of how they got through this. When this is lost, it will fall apart a few centuries later. But at this point they survived. They made it through. And this is, again, a lesson for us today. As long as we can continue to believe and have our sense of identity as Americans, as Canadians, we can get through these tough times. It won't be easy, and we're all going to have to tighten our belts, and we're all going to have to go through some tough times, and most of all, we're all going to have to make sure we try to help each other in these tough times, because that's how you get through tough times. But as long as we can do that and keep our identities and keep our civil treatment of each other, I think we can make it through this. The Romans did make it through. It wasn't easy. It was very, very hard for them at this time here. The shock to the system was significant, and this is something else. When your system has a shock, as I mentioned before, it is going to adapt. Human beings adapt. We're good at that, right? We're good at that. So when you have a massive shock to the system, adaptation is part of the deal. And this is something we're hopefully going to see in the world today. Human beings today all over the world, in all countries, with this terrible coronavirus thing, are going to adapt. And we're going to make some changes. And some of those changes would be inconceivable last year. All right, but we may start to see some changes. I think we're going to have a major change in the way we do healthcare in our system. Keep in mind the Europeans are going to have to make a major change as well. There are countries like Germany, for example, that wisely stockpiled medical supplies before this ever hit. They're doing better than countries that didn't. And that includes all of us. So we want to think in terms of down the road, what change is this shock going to have in our system? The Romans had to make that same choice. What kind of a change is going to happen in the Roman world because of this terrible 50-year shock? Well, here's what seems to happen. Here's what happens. Recovery begins, all right? They start to pull it together even before this 50-year period ends, all right? It's still tough, times are still hard, and they're still fighting with each other. Keep in mind, I want to be emperor, you want to be emperor, we take our armies out, we beat each other up. Whoever survives gets to be the emperor. That's how they were doing it. Not a very good system of succession, by the way. Not a very good way of doing that, but this is what they would do. All right? It's one thing about the United States that I really appreciate is we have a constitution where we don't have that kind of fighting for the presidency or something like that. So we can be grateful for our founding fathers for this. All right? So you find this improvement starts slow, but it starts to pick up. And into this comes a guy named Diocletian. Now, Diocletian comes from the Balkans. He comes from the Balkans, and he is a really interesting guy. Here's my advice. If you're ever in a bookstore and you see a book, How to Succeed by Diocletian, my advice is to buy that book. Buy several copies of that book. And why do I say this? Because Diocletian is one of history's great success stories. He was born either a slave or the son of a slave. He was born at the very, very, very bottom of the Roman social pyramid. I mean, really at the bottom. And this guy became emperor of the Roman Empire. So if you want to know how to succeed in life, this is the right guy to ask, because he did it. He was quite impressive, our friend Diocletian. All right, so this guy manages to pull things together. In 284 AD, he seizes power. He knocks off his last rival. He becomes the sole emperor of the Roman Empire, and he's a crucial figure because he is the guy who really pulls them together. He's the one who pulls them out of this nasty 50-year civil war problem that they'd had. All right, now this means a couple of things. A couple of very, very important things. He was very talented, obviously, a very smart and talented guy, and he stays in power for 20 years, which means stability. If you have a nice long reign of your emperor, he's going to make things stable here. He also is very smart, and he realizes we came this close to total collapse. We can't have that again. All right, we can't have that again. Now, again, what I said earlier, all right, in times of crisis, you start thinking outside the box, and that's what Diocletian does. He says, we're going to actually, obviously, have to run this empire in a very different way than we've done it before. So he is open to new ideas. He's open to trying new things. Some of those things will work. Some of those things won't, but he's going to try a variety of new things. So here's what he says. Number one, the job of emperor is too big for one guy. All right, it's just too big. And this, of course, is something we could say about the United States. Some people have said this about being president of the United States. It's a huge job. It's also the worst job in the world. I mean, God, what an awful job. Can you imagine the pressure, the stress? Everyone's mad at you all the time. It's a tough, tough, tough job. And what Diocletian says is that the job of emperor is too big for one guy. We need to have a co-emperor. We need to have a secondary emperor to help the primary emperor. This is what he sets up to do. So he says, okay, I'm going to get a guy named Maximian, and he's going to be my junior emperor, and he's going to help me out with my job. And he does this in 286 AD. All right? And 7 years later, he says, even that's not enough. So I'm going to try something else, okay? I'm going to add junior emperors. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have 2 big emperors, and underneath those big emperors are going to be 2 more junior emperors, all right? And the way this is going to work is going to solve our succession problem. Because what's going to happen is when the older emperors start getting really old, they'll abdicate the throne. The junior emperors will step into their place, and they'll appoint 2 new junior emperors, and things will be smooth. So he recognized this crucial failing of the Roman system, which of course was this idea that, hey, guess what? We should, well, knock each other off in civil wars every time there's a new emperor. That doesn't work so well. So he's trying to come up with a new way to make this work. And this actually works for a while. All right. In 297, Galerius, one of the junior emperors, defeats the Sasanians, makes peace on the eastern border. The eastern border is finally stable because those Sasanians were nasty pressurers against those poor Romans here. All right. For several decades, Rome regains control of Armenia. Things are starting to come together. The civil wars that they've been fighting have come to an end. Resources can once again be put into something other than killing each other, which will help everybody. All right. And that's a good thing here. They actually planned a real budget. Now, this is something that we kind of take for granted today. We think, well, of course, the governor, the president, all these people, they're going to put together a budget. That's just smart. Of course you're going to do that. Well, guess what? Throughout much of history, the budget of the government was ad hoc. It just was whatever money we had, we'll do this. They actually started planning a budget in this time, which was really, really smart, all right? They reformed the tax system, right? Because obviously taxes are a big problem. Nobody likes paying taxes, but in order to make things work, everyone needs to. So you reform the tax system to make it work, all right? Military and civilian power, which governors had previously held, are now divided between civilian and military commands. You get someone who's good at the military side, you get someone who's good at the civilian side, and each of them has their job. You start making things work better, in other words. That's what Diocletian is trying to do, all right? And of course, they instituted controls to try and keep inflation under controls. It's called the Edict of Prices in 301 AD. The currency was reformed. All sorts of things are happening. And one more thing is happening on top of this, and it's a big one, all right? The role of the emperor has been changing. The role of the emperor has been changing over time, and this is a social change, and it's a big deal. Pomp and circumstance. In other words, the emperor has a cool hat. He's got a crown. He sits on a throne. Very much unlike what Augustus did way back in the day, because Augustus, remember, said, I'm first citizen. He didn't push this, I'm the king thing. All right? But now they're doing that. I'm the emperor, especially when foreign emissaries show up. Put on a show. Make sure they understand how big and powerful we are, how important we are. And we still do this today. I mean, one of the reasons the White House is such a nice building is so that foreign dignitaries can see how powerful America is. All right, this is what we do too, so this makes a certain amount of sense for them. All right, the emperor was seen as favored by the gods. Oh yes, the gods like the emperor. Hooray for the emperor, the gods like him. Diocletian actually portrayed himself as the son of Jupiter, the main god of the Roman pantheon here. And this is also going to show up in one other way. All right, Diocletian is infamous for his persecution of a group called the Christians, who we're going to talk about a little bit later. All right, Diocletian is famous, or infamous if you were, because he's the guy who really ramped up persecutions of the Christians, because the Christians would not worship the emperor as a god. And this is going to be a real sticking point in this whole thing here. All right, and then Diocletian, having reached the top, starting at the bottom, remember, reaches the top, and he says, I'm going to abdicate. I'm going to have a peaceful transfer of power, and I'm going to step down from the throne. Now, this is, again, something that today we do, at least in the United States, quite naturally. After 4 years or 8 years, presidents naturally and peacefully step down. As long as they do that, the system is working. If you ever get a president, ever, who says, nope, I'm not leaving the White House. I'm not stepping down. I'm not giving up my control of the government or of the United States. You ever get a guy like that, that guy has just broken everything. And he's going to send us right off a cliff, and he's going to send us straight down the tubes. You do not ever want any president, whether you like the guy or don't like the guy, to ever say, I'm not leaving. All right, and if that does happen, they need to send in the people with wraparound jackets, put him in a straitjacket, and haul him away, because he's lost his marbles. Our Constitution says 2 terms max, and you're gone no matter how good you work. All right, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. Diocletian realized this, and he said, rather than have a civil war, I'm just going to step down. I can't go any higher in the social pyramid, and so I'm going to just step down, and then everything will fit. Everything will come into place. Everything will work. Does it work? No. And that is going to be the beginning of our next discussion, which we will pick up next time. So that's your cliffhanger.